goes Eric Schmitt. I think we've got him back now. Senator, can you hear me this time?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. So, Trump versus J.G.G. and nationwide injunctions. What do we do?
Yeah, so I think that, as I've been saying, by the way, Hugh, it's great to be with you again. It's been a little while. So it's great to be with you. We can make it work. But look, as I've been saying, I think a lot of these lower court rulings, it's like a bit of a sugar high for the left. But as they make their way through our court system, the courts of appeal, the Court of Appeals, and then the Supreme Court, President Trump's well within his rights to do a lot of the things that he's doing, and I'll walk you through that. But this one in particular, it's interesting. Judge Boasberg on this on the criminal aliens who were here who were deported. Somehow he got the case, and not a lot of people are talking about this, but he wasn't the emergency assignment judge that day. It rotates every day. He wasn't. Somehow at 1:30 in the morning, he got the case. Now he's the presiding judge. Maybe he was tipped off. I don't really know, but it's very unusual. The emergency judge 100% of the time gets the case. So Judge Boasberg got it, in my view, inserted himself into this. But ultimately he was slapped down. Now, it was a standing issue. It's a standing ruling, so it's going to be sort of sent back. This thing's going to continue to get litigated. But look, President Trump, these are core commander-in-chief authorities, right? These are Article II authorities. By calling on the Alien and Enemies Act specifically, he's declared this a predatory incursion. He's well within his rights to begin these deportations. This is like a federal district court judge directing missile strikes or troop movements. These are core Article II functions for the President of the United States. And then, of course, you've got all the domestic cases like firings, hirings, personnel, payroll, those sorts of things. Again, very much within the realm of what the Article II branch can do, within its own powers. Very different, Hugh, I'll close with this. It's very different than what Joe Biden was doing when he was president. He was using his authority to expand the power, right? He was using his authority to make OSHA require 100 million people to get the COVID shot, or the student loan debt forgiveness scam. I happened to bring both of those cases when I was Missouri Attorney General, and we won at the Supreme Court because he was expanding the Article II powers beyond what was ever intended. So what President Trump's trying to do here is, he talked about securing the border and deportations. He's doing that. And he also talked about reining in the size and scope of government. He's doing that too.
Now, Senator Schmitt, I've read Trump versus J.G.G. I've taught it twice this week. It's a very limited decision, but it is very explicit that habeas lies only in the jurisdiction where the prisoner is. And so, I mean, the Supreme Court was trying to be as direct as possible. Do you think they are moving fast enough? There's a critique, and I think this is maybe why Justice Barrett joined the dissent, that the Supreme Court is moving too fast, but the modern administrative state, as AEI scholar Adam White was making an argument on the Commentary podcast, is so big and so fast, if the court doesn't pick up the pace, like Mark Twain said about a lie, it's halfway around the world before truth gets its boots on. The Supreme Court has to pick up the pace on these things. Do you agree?
I do, because what you're seeing now with the nationwide injunctions, these are these are temporary restraining orders, which aren't reviewable right away, as you know, to the Supreme Court. So normally in the past, temporary restraining orders were just for a few days until you had a hearing on the merits for a preliminary injunction or ultimately a permanent injunction. So, but what's happening now is these judges are extending it as long as they can, maybe even sometimes for over a month. So I think it's important. One takeaway, I agree with you on this potentially being a narrow decision, not being under the guise of the Administrative Procedure Act, but sort of as you alluded to, on a habeas sort of action. But a very important thing did happen. The Supreme Court took it, and they basically overturned the lower court on it. It really was a challenge to the temporary restraining order. So that's one mechanism by which these district court judges have had an outsized impact, which is a relatively new phenomenon. President Trump has, he's already seen more of these in the first 80 days than you did in Obama and Biden's 12 years. So there's a lot of abuse happening right now.
Yeah, the best part of the opinion is the per curiam, but they still say, the AEA, the Alien Enemies Act, is entitled to a lot of deference because it's the president acting at the flood. I think Robert Jackson would call it Zone 1 in Youngstown, Sheeton 2. So I was glad to get kind of a nod and a message to the district court judges around the country. Go slow here, because there's a lot of deference involved with the AEA when it's combined with Article 2. I'm an optimist on that. Are you an optimist on the removal cases? Because this strikes at the heart of the administrative state. If the president can roll in and replace the, quote, independent agencies, which have no provision for in the Constitution, if he can yank the lefties off of these commissions, I'm all for that. We have to deal with it if we lose the presidency. But what do you think, Senator?
Yeah, I think this is, as you know, people who've looked at this over the years have been waiting for a case, and I think that's what's going to happen. The so-called independent agencies. This is going to make its way to the Supreme Court, and we're going to have a decision once and for all. Interestingly, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head. I had an X thread about it earlier this week that Joe Biden helped kind of set the stage for this with some of his firings, actually. So look, I think a lot of these are headed, especially the removal cases. You also have a decision that came down this week on the probationary employees, and that's an important ruling that's gone in President Trump's favor right now. All the district court rulings have been stayed in the sense that President Trump can move forward with the firing of these probationary employees. That's an important thing. Look, if you believe, well, here's what's interesting, Hugh, is for a long time, I've always said that the administrative state's totally not accountable. Nobody knows who the undersecretary of the EPA is that they can hold accountable for a guidance letter that destroys a family business. But the argument against that is, well, no, actually, there is accountability. It's with the president, right? And the voters can have, if that's true, the president does have the authority, of course, to hire and fire like he should be able to and run the executive branch. And so there's a lot of important principles at play here. But if we're serious about reigning in the administrative state or dismantling the administrative state because it's totally unaccountable, I think I'm optimistic about the conditions here to challenge a lot of those things more than we've ever had. I think this court is ready to rule on these, and I'm hopeful.
Yeah, Chevron decision, Loper Bright. I'm very optimistic. There's one thing I want to get into with you, Senator, and it's going to romp into my break, and I'll talk to you at the break and play it later in the program, but I'll set it up right now. For years and years, I've complained to my friends in the Senate, I got a few, that the blue slip rule just screws California. And I'm out here 4 months every year when I teach every other year. And there are no district court judges in the Trump one because they wouldn't agree to any. If you live in Missouri, you're blessed. You got Eric Schmitt and Josh Hawley working on who's going to be on the district court. That doesn't happen out here. We don't get any judges at all. So I'm going to ask Eric Schmitt during the break. I'll play it for you later. What do we do about this? Because it's a real problem in blue jurisdictions where they can't get one decent district court judge confirmed. Stand by. I'll play it for you later. So I'm back with Senator Eric Schmitt now. Senator, I lined it up. When you've got a red state, you and Josh Hawley sit down and you send a list of district court judges over to the White House. You negotiate a bit. You say, hey, we want Tim Garrison here or somebody else there and doing this. It gets done. California's got 2 blue senators and nothing happens. How do we fix that problem? I don't know if there's a district court judge with common sense been appointed since W, maybe even before that.
Yeah, so I'm always going to shoot you straight on this one. I think the reality is if we actually believe the district court judges, which is honestly the big debate that we're having right now, what should the impact of a district court ruling be? Should it be nationwide or should it be more localized and with the parties that are before the court? I think we believe that it's the latter, not the former. It does mean that those home state senators have a lot more to say about who moves forward. And I can tell you that we've got 4 or 5 district court openings now. Because when we were working with the Biden administration, who's trying to appoint judges, we weren't going to let these radical judges through. And so it kind of cuts both ways. I will say this, though. I think the fact that it's a Republican-held Senate now, that we've got a majority, that does help because there's only so long that you can have some of these vacancies, even in a state like California. So at a minimum, hopefully would moderate those judges. I would love to see a bunch of Scalias populate the federal bench in a state like California. But our better shot probably is at the circuit court level. And as you know, the Ninth Circuit, actually, after President Trump's first term, you can get a decent panel now.
Yes, you can.
Ninth Circuit.
Yes, you
can. That's a big deal. That's a sea change because, as you know, a lot of these cases were filed, and they made their way to the Ninth Circuit, and that created a real problem nationally. But I think we're moving away from that. And if you get another 4 years here, President Trump appointing people even at the circuit court level, it would minimize, I think, the problem that you're talking about.
Quick exit question. Is there any way Eric Schmitt and a bunch of, very good lawyers go find Senator Schiff and go find Senator Padilla and sit down and just say, let's get some some district court judges who've been trial lawyers who are not particularly political but can move the docket, because it's also a docket problem in California. You can't get to court.
Yeah.
Is there any way to actually talk sense to your colleagues in the Senate? Especially, Adam's new, but Alex has been around for a couple of years.
I mean, we'll see. I mean, hope springs eternal, and both Senator Hawley and I are on the Judiciary Committee, and so are Senators Padilla and Schiff are on the Judiciary Committee. So maybe there is something that could get worked. I would hope so, because at some point you do run into the sort of the administration of justice issue where you just don't have enough people handling the court system. Yeah, in the cases that are being filed.
Senator Schmitt, good to talk to you. I love talking law with you and with Senator Hawley and with Senator Cruz and Senator Cotton. Whenever I get a lawyer, I like to go into the weeds, and I think the audience does as well.
It's great to be with you, and I was going to reference the Justice Jackson's concurrence in the Youngstown Steel case, but you beat me to it, so that was a lot of fun.
All right, well, I just, if I can say I had Eric Schmitt for even one day, I'm happy. Thank you, Senator. Thank you for making it happen. Sorry about the audio problem. We'll talk to you again soon.
See you, Hugh.